Turn the engine off. Hands where I can see them. Right now. The command exploded through the humid Maryland night before the man in the driver's seat had even fully lifted his foot off the brake. Red and blue strobes flooded the narrow residential block, bouncing off brick townhouses, parked SUVs, and rain-dark pavement. Elijah Carter froze with both hands on the wheel, his seat belt still across his chest, his phone still glowing on the console with a half-finished text to his wife. Outside. 20 minutes earlier, his night had been ordinary in the way exhausted people treasure. He had just come off a brutal shift at a trauma center outside Washington, where the fluorescent lights never dimmed and every hallway carried some version of grief. His back ached, his eyes burned, and the faint smell of antiseptic still clung to his coat. He had driven straight from the hospital to his mother-in-law's townhouse to pick up his wife after dinner. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't lost. He wasn't circling the block. He pulled in, put the car in park, and looked up at the second-floor window where the curtain moved. That was when the cruiser appeared behind him like it had been hunting for an excuse. Officer Brent Holloway came at the car fast, one hand on his holster, the other blasting a flashlight through the windshield. He didn't walk like a man checking on a suspicious vehicle. He walked like a man arriving at a scene he already believed belonged to him. License and registration. Elijah kept his hands visible. Officer, my wallet is in my coat and the registration is in the glove box. I'll move slowly. Don't reach for anything until I tell you. The beam fixed on Elijah's face, then his chest, then his hands again. Holloway was broad, tight-jawed, with the kind of swagger that turned a badge into a dare. A younger officer named Mills stayed back by the rear door, watching Holloway more than he watched Elijah, already learning the worst habits of police culture in real time. What are you doing on this block? Holloway asked. Waiting for my wife. You live here? My mother-in-law does. Holloway leaned closer, dragging the flashlight over the leather seats, the folded hospital scrubs in the back, the ID badge clipped to Elijah's coat pocket. His mouth flattened, and something mean settled behind his eyes. This your car? Yes. Dispatch says it isn't. It was a clean lie, and Elijah knew at the moment he heard it. The registration was current. The plates were in his name. The insurance had renewed 2 weeks earlier. But Holloway said it with the confidence of a man used to facts arriving after force. Officer, I can show you the registration. Step out of the vehicle. For what reason? That was all it took. Elijah's tone stayed calm, but Holloway heard resistance where there was only a request for legal basis. The officer's shoulders tightened. The flashlight beam snapped back into Elijah's face. You don't ask me questions. Step out before I pull you out. A porch light across the street clicked on. Then another. Somewhere behind a curtain, someone was already watching. Elijah could feel the block waking around them, drawn by the pitch of Holloway's voice. He opened the door carefully, keeping both palms up. He got 1 foot onto the pavement before Holloway grabbed a fistful of his jacket and yanked him hard enough to twist him sideways into the frame. The door flew wider. Elijah stumbled. Holloway slammed him chest first across the hood with such force the metal boomed. His cheek struck the surface. One hand braced on instinct. The other stayed open. Stop resisting, Holloway shouted. I'm not resisting. The denial was calm. That made Holloway angrier. He jerked Elijah's right arm behind his back until the shoulder gave with a wet pop that Elijah felt all the way into his jaw. Pain shot wide across his vision. Mills shifted uneasily, but said nothing. Why are you on this property? Holloway barked. It's my family's house. Don't lie to me. He drove a forearm into Elijah's neck. Elijah gasped against the hood, one shoe slipping on the wet curb. Inside the townhouse above them, a chair scraped the floor. The front door opened. A woman stepped out under the porch light in a gray suit and house slippers, her expression moving from confusion to horror in less than a second. Take your hands off him. Her voice cut through the scene so sharply even Mills turned. She was not shouting blindly. She was looking, measuring, locking every detail into place. Elijah twisted enough to see her through the blur in his eye. Naomi Carter, his wife. Her hair still pinned from a dinner she had expected to end quietly. Her phone already in one hand. Holloway didn't release him. He glanced at her with the same contempt men like him reserve for witnesses they assume can be bullied. Go back inside, ma'am. This doesn't concern you. Naomi stepped off the stoop and into the wash of the cruiser lights. That is my husband. Take your hands off him now. Holloway tightened his grip instead. Your husband was acting suspicious. He parked in front of his mother-in-law's house. He failed to comply. No, Naomi said, and now her voice changed. It got quieter, deadlier. He asked for your legal basis. And you just dislocated his shoulder on camera. That was the first moment Holloway hesitated. Not because he was afraid of being wrong, but because something in her tone suggested she wasn't guessing. Neighbors were coming onto porches now, phones up, front doors open, faces lit by their own screens. A teenager on the opposite sidewalk started recording openly. An older woman 2 houses down shouted that she had Ring cameras on the whole block. Another neighbor said she'd seen the entire stop from her kitchen window. Naomi raised her phone and spoke with terrifying precision. This is Assistant United States Attorney Naomi Carter. Badge number 41726. I need a supervising officer, Internal Affairs, and EMS to 1800 Brookfield Lane immediately. My husband has just been forcibly removed from his vehicle without probable cause. The silence that followed was so sudden it felt physical. Mills looked at Holloway. Holloway slowly released Elijah's arm. For half a second, nobody moved. The sound of idling engines and distant cicadas filled the street. Holloway's face emptied, then hardened again as if aggression could still save him. You can't interfere with a lawful stop, he said. Naomi took one step closer. Lawful stops don't begin with false plate returns. Lawful stops don't end with an unarmed man slammed onto a hood outside his family's home. And if your body camera was on when you lied, you're done. Elijah straightened slowly, cradling his shoulder with his left hand. His breathing was shallow now. His hospital badge had snapped loose and was hanging by a corner. One of the neighbors crossed over with a towel and offered it for the blood at his lip. Naomi never took her eyes off Holloway. Then the second reveal landed. The front door opened again, and an older woman stepped onto the porch in a navy robe, silver hair tightly pinned, reading glasses still hanging from a chain at her neck. It was Elaine Porter, Naomi's mother. On that block, she was just the woman who hosted Sunday dinners and handed out tomato plants in spring. But to anyone who followed state politics, Elaine Porter was something else entirely. 3 weeks earlier, she had been appointed chair of Maryland's newly expanded Police Accountability Commission after 20 years as a federal civil rights judge. Holloway looked at her, and for the first time all night, the confidence left his face. Judge Porter took in the bent door, Elijah's shoulder, the cluster of recording phones, the shaken rookie, the cruiser lights staining her lawn red. She did not rush. She did not scream. She came down the steps one at a time, each one seeming to strip the street of Holloway's authority. Officer, she said, state your name and badge number for every camera here. Holloway swallowed. Officer Brent Holloway. Badge 512. Good, she said, because you are going to repeat it in depositions for the next 2 years. The supervisor arrived 6 minutes later. By then, the block had become a live archive. 7 neighbors had recorded the stop from different angles. 3 Ring cameras captured the initial approach. A delivery van idling at the corner had a dash cam pointed straight at the curb. Naomi had already photographed the inside of Elijah's car, untouched, registration plainly visible in the glove box. Elijah's hospital badge lay on the hood in plain view beside the smear where his face had struck metal. Holloway tried to recover control with paperwork. He told the supervisor Elijah had made a furtive movement toward the center console. He claimed he smelled marijuana. He claimed the vehicle had returned under a possible stolen flag. Each sentence sounded thinner than the one before it. Mills stayed quiet until Naomi asked him directly whether he had smelled anything. His pause lasted too long. The neighbors heard it. The supervisor heard it. Holloway heard it. Elijah was taken by ambulance to the same trauma center where he had spent the day saving other people. X-rays confirmed a partially dislocated shoulder, torn ligaments, bruised ribs, and a cervical strain from the forearm across his neck. By midnight, the video had already begun moving beyond the neighborhood. One clip showed the exact moment Holloway said, "Dispatch says it isn't," regarding the car. Another caught Naomi identifying herself while Holloway still had Elijah pinned. A third showed Judge Porter asking for his badge number with the kind of calm that makes panic spread faster. By sunrise, the local stations had it. By noon, cable news had it. By evening, the city was no longer discussing one officer on one block. It was discussing a department. That was when the hidden truth widened. Reporters learned Elijah Carter was not just an innocent husband waiting outside family property. He was Dr. Elijah Carter, chief of trauma surgery at St. Catherine's, a former Army combat medic with 2 Bronze Stars, and the physician who had led emergency response training for first responders across 3 counties, including Holloway's own department. 6 months earlier, he had treated an officer shot during a traffic stop and stayed at the hospital until the family arrived. Photographs surfaced of Elijah in scrubs beside police command staff at a public safety fundraiser. Men who had shaken his hand in daylight had watched one of their own grind his face into a hood after dark. The department tried the first move institutions always try. They called it a troubling incident and placed Holloway on administrative leave pending review. It lasted 6 hours. Then the body camera footage came in. Holloway had turned it on late, but not late enough. The recording did not show any stolen vehicle alert. Dispatch audio showed no such return was ever transmitted. There was no mention of a plate issue, no bolo, no suspicious vehicle notice. It did capture Holloway muttering to Mills as he stepped out of the cruiser, "Watch this guy." It captured Elijah calmly narrating his movements. It captured Holloway giving conflicting commands. It captured the impact. And most devastating of all, it captured Holloway saying, after Naomi identified herself, "I didn't know who he was." That sentence detonated online because everyone understood what it meant. If Elijah had been who Holloway thought he was, the violence would have been acceptable to him. The floodgates opened. Within 48 hours, the county complaint office was buried. Past allegations against Holloway resurfaced from people who had never believed anyone would care. A black HVAC contractor said Holloway once handcuffed him on a sidewalk for matching a description and never wrote a report. A college student produced hospital photos of bruises from a stop Holloway claimed involved active resistance. A church deacon came forward with a dismissed complaint alleging Holloway had threatened to teach him respect during a registration check. 2 of those complaints had been marked unfounded by supervisors who never interviewed witnesses. Then Mills broke. Not publicly at first. He spoke to investigators under Garrity protections, thinking he could save his own career. Instead, he opened the entire machine. He said Holloway regularly initiated pretext stops in majority black neighborhoods without legal basis. He said officers joked about fishing on Brookfield because the residents drove newer cars than Holloway believed they should. He said supervisors knew the pattern and tolerated it as long as arrest numbers looked strong. He said reports were cleaned up after the fact. He said Holloway had bragged that if someone asked for probable cause, "You create it." Once that statement hit the internal memo, the county executive had no choice but to act. Internal affairs became a criminal referral. The state attorney general's office opened a civil rights inquiry. The U.S. Department of Justice requested records tied to stops, searches, use of force incidents, and complaint closures involving Holloway's unit. The Police Accountability Commission, chaired by Judge Porter, scheduled an emergency public hearing. It was carried live. Holloway showed up in a borrowed suit and tried to survive on procedure. He called the encounter fast-moving. He called Elijah non-compliant. He called Naomi confrontational. Then the screen behind him lit up with synchronized footage from 4 angles at once. The street, the porch, the dash cam, the body cam. Same sequence. Same lie. Same unnecessary force. Same panic when Status entered the scene. Naomi did not grandstand when she testified. She didn't need to. She walked the board through the evidence like a prosecutor building a wall brick by brick. Dispatch logs disproving the plate claim. Medical records documenting injuries consistent with the slam. Neighborhood footage showing Elijah had not made any threatening movement. Prior complaints showing pattern. Body cam audio revealing motive. She ended with a sentence the room never forgot. "My husband should not have needed a title, a uniform, or a federal lawyer standing on the curb to be treated like a citizen." Applause broke out anyway. Then came the final collapse. A forensic audit of Holloway's prior stops found missing footage, inconsistent narratives, and multiple search justifications copied word for word across unrelated incidents. The county prosecutor announced criminal charges, second-degree assault, misconduct in office, false statement in an official report, and deprivation of rights under color of law under joint state-federal review. The department fired Holloway for cause before the hearing process even finished, citing dishonesty, excessive force, and conduct that rendered him permanently unfit for law enforcement service. Mills was suspended, then decertified after evidence showed he had repeatedly corroborated false reports. 2 supervisors were forced into retirement. The chief held a press conference meant to contain the damage, but the numbers were worse than anyone expected. A pattern analysis of vehicle stops over 3 years showed black drivers on Brookfield and adjacent corridors were stopped at nearly 4 times the rate of white drivers at night, with lower recovery of contraband and higher use of force ratios. The county council passed emergency reforms within a month: mandatory independent review for force during traffic stops, automatic dispatch log preservation, public complaint tracking, stricter body cam activation enforcement, and immediate civilian access to stop records. The Justice Department later announced a formal pattern or practice investigation into the agency. Elijah filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, but by then the case was bigger than money. His name became shorthand for a line the public was no longer willing to let police cross in secret. When he returned to work with his arm still in rehab, nurses and orderlies lined the corridor and applauded. He hated the attention. He never wanted to be a symbol. He had only wanted to pick up his wife after dinner. Holloway's trial ended the following spring. The jury took less than 4 hours. Guilty on assault. Guilty on misconduct. Guilty on falsifying the report. Federal prosecutors later secured a plea on the civil rights count to avoid a second trial, and Holloway was sentenced to prison, stripped of certification, and barred permanently from holding any position in law enforcement or public safety. His name, once backed by a badge, became a case citation in training manuals about unlawful escalation and racially biased policing. And in the end, that was the part no one in power could reverse. Not the body cam, not the neighbors' videos, not the dispatch logs, not the testimony, not the verdict. One officer dragged the wrong man out of a car because he believed the badge on his chest was stronger than the rights of the citizen in front of him. He found out too late that the man had a name, a family, a record of service, and people who knew exactly how to force the truth into daylight. The street saw it. The cameras kept it. The law caught up. And the system that protected him cracked open under the weight of what it had done. Justice did not arrive because Holloway found a conscience. It arrived because the lie failed, the evidence survived, and the public finally saw what had been happening when no one important was supposed to be watching. If you believe accountability should never depend on who the victim turns out to be, comment justice and subscribe.